going into the summer, things you ought to look out for, and what's going to be munching on your trees. Emmett has a lot of experience in plant health care, and his company provides plant health products for sale and helps the folks in our industry get the job done. So welcome, Emmett.
Thanks for having me on, Wes. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to see you here.
Yeah.
So, we're going into summer. It's May, it gets hot, and trees get stressed, and we start getting a lot more insect pests around here. Around here we've got different times of seasons where we've got lots of different insect pests changing all the time, and summer is a hard one for some of our trees. So what are some of the common pests that we see around here that we really need to be on the lookout for this summer?
Yeah, so in DFW, well, yes, there are insect pests in the summer, but it's also a fun time to be out scouting for trees and finding these things. There's a few of them that are really common. Crepe myrtle bark scale is probably the most common landscape pest that you're going to see out there.
It's on pretty much all the crepe myrtles.
Pretty much all crepe myrtles. And so what's interesting is, for me being on this side, I've been with Arborist for about 9 years. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, I was a plant healthcare manager for Dallas Area Tree Care Company, and that was like 2010 to 2014.
I was right when it was building up.
Yes, and so crepe myrtle bark scale, I've treated thousands of crepe myrtles for that pest.
Yep.
And now, as a homeowner, I've got just planted a couple of more. I have several crepe myrtles at my house.
Making some work for yourself.
And, I was looking at them yesterday or this past weekend, mm-hmm. and I was actually pointing out to my wife, I was like, oh, see that up there? See that white stuff? That's the scale insects.
Yep.
But then I saw, it looks like a mealybug, but it's actually...
Mealybug destroyer.
It's it's a white, I forget the scientific name, but it's a ladybug larva mm-hmm. for the twice-stabbed lady beetle. It's black with 2 red spots.
Yep.
And I saw its larva up there with the scale, and
yes.
it's going to eat them. It's a beneficial insect.
Right.
And so kind of what I've seen over the years from treating thousands of crepe myrtles to now having my own at my house, I feel like the predator has caught up to the pest in terms of population. I feel like the predators are doing a better job.
Well, the predators do a pretty good job in a lot of cases. It seems like there's certain varieties that they prefer better than others. I see Natchez crepe myrtles or some of the little dwarf ones like Dynamite that have the red flowers. Mm-hmm. They tend to get heavily infested. Even the really small, the ultra dwarfs, I've had to treat those multiple times a season. It just doesn't seem like the insecticide has as long of a residual on it, but they also get covered up in aphids.
Yeah.
But you're right, the predators are definitely good to have around. I like to show my customers signs of the beneficial predators. Sometimes you'll find groups of pupal cases mm-hmm. on the trunk for the ladybugs, or you'll find green lacewing eggs. And so it's nice to have that as a kind of a visual aid. And you can tell the customer that, look, if the predators didn't have food, they wouldn't be here. It's just a sign that you're infested. And it's also a good segue into using systemic insecticides or non-toxic methods that
right.
are softer on our beneficials.
Yeah, what's the pupal casings of the ladybug larva. I remember I had a customer, this is back when I was treating trees, a person sent me a picture. What is this? They were freaked out because they had the pupal casings, the exoskeletons mm-hmm. from the molting attached to their trunk, and they were like, what is this? Oh my God, what's on my tree?
It looks like something out of an alien movie.
You're right. But it was a good thing.
Yeah,
and so,
it is a good thing.
Crepe myrtle bark scale, that's probably the main thing. It started in Richardson back in 2004. And so, but it's fascinating with that scale. It spread very quickly throughout the United States and really the Southeast, I imagine on nursery stock. But
well, it spreads fast around here too, I think, because everybody's got crepe myrtles.
Yes.
It's pretty easy for it to get around.
All right, so let's see. Scale insects. So you mentioned armored scale.
Armored scales, yep.
That's another very common pest, especially on our oaks around here.
Lots of obscure scale.
Yes.
I see a lot of gloomy scales on maples,
right.
Sometimes even on sweet gums and
mm-hmm.
hackberries, but usually on maples.
Yeah. And so armored scales are difficult to control with systemics mm-hmm. As opposed to soft scales. And the main thing that I teach people about on those is how to tell the difference. Soft scales produce honeydew.
Right.
Armored scales do not. And
Correct.
So To homeowners, if they have a honeydew problem, which is the sticky stuff that if you've ever parked under a tree and get the sticky stuff on your windshield or on your hood, that's honeydew, and that's a indication that tree may have scale or aphids or some other piercing sucking insect feeding on it. Whereas the armored scales don't produce that, and they're going to be really camouflaged, and that's something that might take a professional to find and diagnose. Even the symptoms of armored scale are very discreet, and to the untrained eye, you wouldn't even know there's a problem there.
A lot of times my customers look at the tree and think, I just thought that was part of the tree.
Right.
They look like a lenticule or part of the bark.
Right.
And it can be difficult to detect. But I tell my customers that if you've got a few hundred of them on a tree, it's not that big a deal. But if you've got a few 100,000 on the tree, it's death by paper cuts.
Yes. Yeah, they're very debilitating insects. All right, so more insects. Coming up, bagworms.
Bagworms are hot. They're getting hot right now. Usually mid-May is when we start seeing them pop out. They can chew up some evergreens in a hurry. Some years it seems like they're really heavy in population. And then other years it seems like we don't see very many.
Yeah, that's cyclical nature of insects. I think is probably a survival mechanism. It's one generation per year, but that doesn't mean all the eggs hatch every year.
Right. Well, at least we do know that. We know that there's always one generation per year and that they always come in May or early June. So if you can go ahead and get your treatment at that time when they start to become active, you're done with it for the year.
Correct. And so bagworms, depending on where you're at in the Metroplex, may be an issue or maybe not. If you're down in Dallas proper or old part of Fort Worth or something like that, you may not see them in your landscape. But as you get out into the more newly developed areas, so on the Dallas side, if you're in Allen, Fairview, parts of McKinney, you get north into Melissa and Anna, where there's lots of native cedars, you're probably going to be seeing this pest.
Right.
And then on the Fort Worth side, where you're in Argyle, so you probably have a fair amount in Argyle.
We do.
Up Denton, west of Denton. I don't even know. The Metroplex has just gone crazy with development.
It has. And people can identify when they've got them by looking for the little cocoons that are usually toward the tips of the branches. Sometimes they're farther back in the branch. But the caterpillar uses bits of the leaves as he builds his cocoon to camouflage it. And so it just contains the foliage of whatever plant they happen to be feeding on.
Right. So
sometimes Japanese maples get them.
They'll get on everything.
Yeah.
So they hatch out of they overwinter as an egg. So you're going to find they like evergreens. So Leland cypress, I think, is their favorite food. And so you'll find an old bag somewhere in the canopy of that Leland cypress. It'll be, I don't know, about this long. The eggs are in there. And so when they hatch out in late May, early June, they will be a proliferation of small caterpillars in their little bags right near that old one. And the little ones, they might be like the size of your small fingernail.
You can see them twitching in there. You can see the cocoons actually twitching, and then you can see them coming out of the top of their bag, coming out to feed, and then they build their cocoon as they get older and they get larger as they go.
And so they camouflage really well, and most people won't even know that they're a problem until later instars of that pest, when they're consuming lots of foliage every single day, and they'll eat those trees to the ground. I've seen them eat Leland cypress to the ground. I've seen them eat arborvitae to the ground.
Spartans, eastern red cedars, bald cypress.
Yep.
They have a wide palette.
Yes, they do. In heavy populations, I've seen them hanging off of gutters of people's houses.
On the eaves and on the bricks.
Yeah, they get all over everything.
Yep.
And so depending on the infestation level, back to IPM, that'll dictate the method of control. And so, a homeowner, I have two little blue point junipers at my house. And I was looking at them the other day and I saw an old bag back inside of there. And if you can find those bags now before they hatch, it's practical that you could pick those off because their eggs are inside of there. So collect those old ones and discard them, and that should eliminate the pest.
It's easier to do on smaller trees.
Yes, absolutely.
A lot of times you need professional help when you've got it on a big tree and it's just not practical or safe getting up on a ladder.
Yeah, or if there's hundreds of them, it might be It's like trying to pull all the weeds out of your yard.
Right.
You think you could do it, but
Yeah.
there's too many.
Well, another common pest that we've got around here that should be gearing up with the heat and the typical drought that we have are wood-boring insects.
Absolutely.
And, that's a broad term that covers a lot of different insects, a lot of different types of wood borers. We've got everything from beetle larvae to moth larvae that actually will chew into wood and damage our trees from the inside. But we see a lot of them when our trees get drought stressed. Last year, we had a terrible heat wave. We had a lot of drought. It was a really rough summer, and we had a heavy population of wood-boring insects. And I wouldn't be surprised if we have the same thing this year. So what are some of the most common ones that you see, and what kind of kicks them off?
Yeah, so wood borers, they're kind of endemic. So you've got your native wood-boring pests, and then also we have an invasive wood-boring pest now, emerald ash borer, that's was found in Fort Worth back in 2018, was found in Denton County in 2020, and then popped up in 3 locations in Dallas County last year.
I also recently got confirmation that it was observed in South Lake.
South Lake, okay.
Yes.
That's new. It's also found in Parker County in Hudson Oaks, out west of Fort Worth. So it is on the move, like from the first location in 2018 to, and I imagine it's going to be found in more Dallas counties, in other places in Tarrant County this year. So we could do a whole podcast on EAB.
We could.
We don't need to, but so EAB is here. Native wood borers. So you've got, if you show me a mature red oak, I'd bet money that there's probably carpenter worms in there somewhere.
Yes.
Carpenter worms are a large Lepidoptera larva. I've got an old picture somewhere. I mean, they'll be as long as your finger inside of a tree. They're kind of interesting. They'll chew into the heartwood of a tree and climb around in there and chew it up, and then they'll come out, they'll exit through the sapwood, and they'll leave their pupal casing in their exit hole, and they turn into a moth as an adult. And so you'll always see that pupal casing stuck in the exit hole. That's a common one. You mentioned drought. So in certain areas where there are pine trees in the Metroplex, I'm thinking kind of like Lake Dallas, Corinth, and then sort of out towards Argyle and not Grapevine, but that South Lake area where there's pines. Under drought conditions, they'll be susceptible to the Ips engraver bark beetle, which is a type of pine bark beetle.
Yep. And what are the signs of that?
Signs of that one, you're going to see your tree fading. And what I mean by that, so a healthy pine is going to be dark green. When they get under attack by bark beetles, which chews up the vascular system that's transporting the water, that tree will begin to fade from dark green to a pale green to a yellow to a red.
Right.
And the thing with bark beetles, what's tricky is once you start to see the symptoms, like once you see it turn yellow, it's kind of too late. And what you need to be preparing is to treat the trees that are nearby.
Right.
Because bark beetles, they're kind of fascinating insects. And that's actually where, so our product Triage, which is what put ArborJet on the map as a company, Triage lasts for 2 years and has very, very effective control of wood-boring pests. It started with bark beetles. And so we did research with the Texas Forest Service. Bark beetles are attracted to pheromones, either by the plants or other beetles. And so basically those trees get stressed out. The beetles can smell that, and they attack that tree. And the more beetles that are in there, they're releasing pheromones also. And so other beetles smell that, and they're like, hey, there's a party over here. Right. And so they all jump on this tree that's stressed out, and they kill it. And so the adult beetles burrow through the bark, colonize underneath the bark, lay eggs, and then the larvae kind of fan out from this larval chamber. And so the galleries are they're kind of fan-shaped. And so depending on the type of beetle. And so those larvae will come out, do their damage, and then they hatch out, and they're going to go find another tree to get on.
They can do a lot of damage in a short period of time. They're eating vascular tissue. It makes it difficult for the tree to to bring sugars down to the roots. And if the sugars aren't getting to the roots don't create energy, the leaves create energy. Mm-hmm. So if the roots don't get energy from the canopy, stops uptaking water, the whole system breaks down and the whole thing ends up crashing.
All right. So on pine, so you want to be on the lookout for fading. And with Ips and engraver beetles, they mostly attack drought-stressed trees. And so you're going to see sawdust associated with those. Pines produce resin, as you know, that's actually a defense compound. And so as a beetle tries to burrow into a pine, that resin that it produces is supposed to push out the beetle. Mm-hmm. Well, with Ips, when trees are drought stressed, they don't have that resin to function. The other thing is it's going to be the tops of pines. So what's kind of fascinating, bark beetles range in size from large. So out in East Texas, you'll find black turpentine beetle and red turpentine beetle. Those will hit low down on the trunk of the tree versus Ips, which is the smallest species. The larger the beetle is, it can't fly as high. So if the beetle is small, it can fly higher. And so the Ips will hit higher up, and then your larger beetles will hit lower down on the tree. And so Ips will primarily kill out the top of a tree. And then so the larger beetles, they'll hit low down and girdle the tree. So other pests of pines, the Zimmerman pine moth. I'm sure that's one you've seen.
Yes.
So Zimmerman pine moth, we're going to see that on Japanese black pine and Austrian pine, also on Elderica pine, mm-hmm. also known as Afghan pine.
Yes.
And so that, I call it popcorn. You're going to see this large, or candle wax. You're going to see this candle wax looking structure, usually where a limb is attached on a crotch of a tree, and you're going to see that come out. That's another Lepidoptera borer. They have 3 generations each year. Again, treatable with the triage products.
Well, but because they have multiple generations per year is one of the reasons you need the long residual
Correct.
Control. Additionally, the trees are being attacked because they're stressed. Mm-hmm. Having the long residual control gives us as tree managers an opportunity to start correcting the deficiencies, whatever's
Yes.
creating the stress, and to help that tree come out of the stress so that by the time the product has lost its efficacy, we're no longer worried about it getting reinfested optimally.
Yes, and that long window, that opens up your treatment window as well. So on the scale insects, where we're talking about using sprays and various other methods of treating, you've got to know the life cycle of that insect, when the crawlers are out, when it's an egg, things like that. With triage, because it lasts for 2 years, you can really apply it any time, and you know it's still going to be present when that borer is there. And so that's, I touched on carpenter worms earlier, and how they might be in the heartwood for a while. Well, no systemic is going to be in the heartwood. Right. And so with triage, I can treat that tree and know whenever that insect is coming out through the xylem and then out through the phloem, through the bark, that triage will be there and it'll take care of that insect.
Yes. So we talked about borers, we've talked about bark scales, armored scales. I think spider mites is another big one. That with the heat, summer coming on, that's one that people really got to be on the lookout for, because their life cycle shortens as the temperature goes up, and their populations can increase very rapidly to a damaging population. What would you say are some of the most common species you see spider mites on?
Junipers. So any type of ornamental juniper and Italian cypress.
They're like magnets.
Yep.
For spider mites.
Yeah, and then also you'll see them on roses and other ornamentals.
Yeah, I see them on magnolias. I see them a lot on oak trees, cedar elms.
Yep.
And sometimes when the population gets real heavy, they can cause some pretty significant defoliation.
Yeah, so you mentioned oak trees, so it's funny. Live oaks, mm-hmm. It's probably the most common species in North Texas is the live oak.
Very common.
In the winter months, the live oaks, they keep their leaves until they put out new leaves. In the winter months, live oaks will kind of have this bronze color to them. And I remember people, homeowners would say, "Oh, that's the fall coloring of a live oak." And I'm like, "No, that's because they're loaded with spider mites." The fall color of a live oak is dark green.
Right.
They're supposed to be dark green all the time. And so if you see that bronze color, because what spider mites are doing is they're eating the chlorophyll out of the leaf. And so you're going to see kind of this browning or bronzing, sort of a dusty appearance on the foliage. That's an indicator of spider mites.
And you also bring up a good point. Yes, we can have big population spikes in the summer during the hot season, but we also have cool season mites.
Correct.
That can be a big problem when you least expect to have a problem with spider mites.
Yep.
So how do you know when you got a spider mite infestation?
Yeah, so look for that dusty coloring, and then if you have junipers or the Italian cypress, a good test, you take a white sheet of paper and just take one of those branches and slap it on the white sheet of paper. And then sometimes you might need a magnifying glass, but if you've got a keen eye, you can usually see the eggs or actually the spider mites crawling around on that white piece of paper.
Yeah. I've got some pretty cool little videos that I took with my cell phone with a little plastic magnifier that I put over the camera lens, and I did an up close on a live oak leaf, and you could see the little spider mites and the eggs and everything on the leaf. And but there's other ways. So the stippling on the leaf surface,
right.
A loss of color in the plant, just a general haze. I find that most plants have a glossy kind of appearance, especially ones that have a thicker waxy coating, and the mites kind of give it a dull appearance. Sometimes you can even see webbing on certain plants.
Yeah. Yes, I saw that on one of my roses already.
We also invite people to come to our website. We've got a tremendous amount of information on there, lots of blog posts that are going to talk about a lot of these major pests and what we can do about it.